Kind of weird.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's live Q&A. I'm here with Laney from Design by Laney. Hello, Laney.
Hello. Hi.
Um, where in the world are you again?
I'm in North Carolina.
Right.
Soon to be Colorado next year, but
Okay, so it's not covered in snow and snowing and freezing rain where you are.
not quite. Just freezing dry.
Yeah. So Laney, if anybody doesn't, well, I'm going to get her to introduce herself in a second, but Laney and I met through the wonderful world of Instagram, which is how I meet most of my guests and my friends on here. But Laney has a stationery invite design company, and she's also a calligrapher. And so she's kind of living the dream that everybody who becomes a calligrapher wants to be living. And today she's going to be talking to us about how to actually run the business client wise and how to deal with clients, because we talk to a lot of guests about how to do the actual work and how to do signage or how to do stationery, but we don't talk to people very much about how to actually deal with the process from having someone inquire to work with you all the way to actually doing the work and getting paid for it. So I think it's a really big, important conversation. And I know that before we got on here, Laney had said to me that her process wasn't always so clean and simple. And so hopefully this can kind of cut out some steps for anybody who's listening that wants to do what you're doing in the future. So before we get into that, can you just give us a little rundown of who you are and what you do?
Yeah. So hi, everyone. I'm Laney. I have a bit of a cold, so I'm a little froggy today. But yeah, I have a stationery design and calligraphy firm. I've started kind of branching off into some creative entrepreneur coaching and business resources as well. But it all started from a calligraphy class back in 2013, 5 years ago, and then evolved into mostly stationery design, a little bit less calligraphy these days. So I don't really make signage anymore and things like that. But it's kind of interesting that calligraphy and stationery are in some ways the same business and in some ways very different. So I'll talk a little bit about that. And I live in North Carolina, moving to Colorado soon. Started out in California, so I've been kind of all over. And a lot of the stuff I'll talk about is making your business so that you can do it from wherever and that you're not really grounded in a specific geography if that's important to you, because that was something that I found when I moved across country that added some difficulties in my process flow. So I'll talk a little bit about that too, but I'm excited to be here.
And so how long have you had your business for?
So 5 years and then a little over 2 years full time.
Okay, cool. And I think it's interesting that because I know when we met, like you were doing signage stuff, you were kind of, both of us were kind of doing everything. And now you've moved away from signage and I've moved more into signage. And so we've kind of like, it's interesting how people will discover what they like and then kind of like change their offerings based on that. That's a topic for another day.
Yeah. When I met Becca, she had not even gone full time yet. And she was asking me about, oh, should I do it? Because I had just done it like, I don't know, maybe a couple months earlier. And I sent her this whole list of like all the reasons it was terrible. And then I was like, but yes, do it. It's the best.
Yeah. I remember that. So I think we should just get right into it then. I know you have kind of a little process to walk us through. So maybe I'll just get my face off here and let you jump in. And then if people have questions as we go, feel free to just toss them in the comments and I can put them up on the screen and read them out. And we can kind of just make this like a impromptu, casual Q&A, ask all the questions about the Bridezillas kind of topic.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so I'll let you get into it.
Okay, awesome. So I just kind of wrote out my process flow in this cute little flow chart. And I'm going to go through it from start to finish. And Becca kind of directed me on some of the questions that you guys have had, but feel free to jump in and ask questions. And I'll provide this process flow with kind of bullet points of what we've talked about. After I'll put like a downloadable PDF link in the comments. And I'll be around asking your questions. If you're watching this not live, I'll be there to answer some questions in the comments and stuff as well. So this is also going to be the process flow for my custom invitations. Your business may look a little different if you have signage or semi-custom suites, things like that. So kind of adjust this to how it works for you. And like Becca mentioned, my process was never perfect. It's never going to be 100% perfect. But I've learned so much over the years, and making this kind of diagram and actually writing it all out and seeing what you're doing and where you can improve is so important to making those adjustments in your business and creating more time, eliminating your errors that you're making, automating processes where you can, and things like that. And this can grow with your business. So when I first started out, I was just like making half of the stuff up. I wrote my contract one night, overnight on a Word document because someone asked for my contract and I didn't have one at that point. So I just, wrote something up until like 3 a.m. and sent it over to them. So this will grow with your business. And like, as you're getting more capital to work with, you can automate more and things like that. I think you were going to jump in.
I was going to say just about the contracts. Like, I think it's really important, and it's a funny story, but like, honestly, I think everybody who has started a business and like doing client work and stuff like this has gone through that, and just like, like do it as you need it and figure it out as you go. And so like, I think a lot of people get stuck on needing to have their whole process mapped out and perfect before they ever get a client. It's just not realistic. So for anybody who's listening and is like stuck on not wanting to get a client because they haven't written a contract or they haven't like, figured out their estimate template and stuff, like it doesn't matter. You can figure it out as you go. But this conversation will help you get an idea of what you should try and get in place as soon as you can, and kind of help you navigate that process quicker than it might have taken both of us.
Yes. It's one of those things, like, you will figure it out, and you'll make, even if you do it the perfect way, you'll still make mistakes. So jump in, like, I'm that Tina Fey quote, like, say yes and figure it out later. I think that's kind of how we all start at the beginning. And this will give you a little bit of framework to follow along, but the main thing is just like every couple months doing this exercise and like writing it all down, writing how your clients find you and what you do from start to finish will, show you which areas you've gotten better at, which areas you could maybe start to improve on. Like maybe you've, invested in a CMS system or something, and you see a new area where you could automate some of those processes, which I'll get to in a minute, what that all means. So I'll start with kind of inquiries and proposals. I know it's a big question of like how you find clients, which I have a whole like hour-long IGTV video on if you want to check it out. But once they've found you, the first thing for me that they do is they either fill out my contact form on my website or send me an email. And that contact form is one way of automating that. So on here, you'll see after they send me an email, I typically need to ask them for more information, because if they just type out an email, they typically don't send like quantity or wedding day or exactly what they need. So the contact form on my website, which I use through a system called Dubsado, but you could use any of the CMS systems, or you could just set it up through like I use Squarespace. So whatever your hosting site is, you can set it up through there with questions. And then they can fill out kind of I ask for like their quantity, their wedding date, certain pieces that they need. And then that gives me a lot more of the information, so I don't have to then send that follow-up email. So then.
Yeah, because I feel like when I had first started, my contact me form or my get a quote form was literally just like put your name and your email address and then just like a blurb. And so you'd get people that would answer and put in their name and email address and then go, can I have a quote for invites?
Right.
And then you have this whole like waste of time where you're replying back to them saying like, hello, when is your wedding? What kind of, what are you looking for? Asking all these questions when you could have just gotten it all right out of the gate when they emailed you. So I think that's a really good point. And I remember it I don't know, it was probably like a good couple months before I changed that form. So getting that done right away is helpful for sure.
And I've changed it a million times because, I used to have on there like invitations, wedding day stuff, signage. I used to have different things that they could click on. And then because of that, there were different budget levels. But what was happening is that like they wanted invitations, but then they would click on the lowest budget level, which I really only had on there for like escort cards or smaller orders. And so they were seeing that small budget level and then seeing invitations and thinking that all the options were available because they were all listed on that site. So reevaluating that contact form has been really helpful too, as your business changes, or even having, if you want signage, click here. If you want invitations, click here, so that you could even have two different contact forms based on that. So then after that, I typically, if they email me, I will ask them for more info usually. But then once I have all that information, I typically provide them with a quote, and that I also use Dubsado to do my invoicing. But when I first started out, I was actually just building out my invoices in a Google Sheet, Excel sheet. So I just created kind of a table format with my logo and contact information, and then I would list like the client name, the wedding date, maybe the due date, and then put out everything they wanted and use Excel to do the math for me.
And for stuff like that, like for actual templates for invoices and quotes and stuff like that, like you can honestly just Google what a typical quote looks like, and just make sure you have all those forms filled in. But I'll even like give myself a shameless plug here, because Joanne from In Detail and I wrote the Panic-Free Pricing Guide, and in there we have an actual picture of what our quote looks like and what all the information is, and so quotes and estimates and contracts and stuff like that is all covered in there. But before any of that, same as you, I was just doing it in a Google Doc or just literally in a Word document and then PDFing it, and it's fine as long as it has all the right information. It doesn't have to be fancy.
Yeah, there's no time when I've never had a client say, oh, your invoice doesn't look fancy enough, I'm not going to book with you. And yeah, there have been clients that didn't book with me, so maybe that was the reason for some of them, but
doubtful.
Yeah, I don't. Even when I was just not even sending like full proofs, but just attaching a PDF of my designs, people were still buying invitations for me. So I don't think some of those things matter quite as much as we think they do. And
that's not to say that it's not to say that if you had like a beautiful process and everything was branded and perfectly lovely and whatever, that people wouldn't love it, but they're not gonna, if they like your work, they're not gonna not choose you because your quote is very basic.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people kind of know where you're at in your business. They can tell like if you're towards the beginning, if you've been around for a while. And so they're not really going to judge you based on, your invoice template. Like branding is important. I totally agree, but it does grow with your business. And I think that, especially on some of those formal documents, like people don't care what your contract looks like.
They just look at the total.
Yeah. They're
the
just
dollar
like,
amount.
okay, I see this dollar amount. So as long as you're like using Excel to add it up and do the math for you so you don't have math errors, that's the part where you might lose someone. But so yeah, I was using that, and I was invoicing through PayPal initially. I will say that I don't love PayPal for large transactions because they have traditionally sided with the consumer on any disputes. So I've heard some cases where clients had or where companies had signed contracts, signed approval forms, et cetera, signed credit card authorizations, and then PayPal still refunded their money to the client when they made a dispute. So there are plenty of other services out there that you can use to do that. You can use QuickBooks if you have that. You can do some invoicing and payments through your website usually if you have the commerce plans. You can use PayPal. I never personally had an issue with it. When I started doing larger and larger transactions, I started to started to feel a little bit more cautious about it. I don't know, Becca, if you have any thoughts on.
I actually still use PayPal.
Oh, okay.
For some, no, it's fine. I haven't had disputes with clients. I've had disputes for people who have bought products from me online that go through PayPal, and they do side with the customer. Okay. But yeah, I haven't had issues with it that way. But I also sometimes will just use PayPal because they have a built-in invoice system. Like you can build your invoice right in PayPal and send it, or you can just build it in PayPal and then save it as a PDF and attach it to an email. So I do that sometimes. If the client wants to pay by check or something like that, I'll still make my invoice in PayPal and just export it. So it's still nothing fancy. Like it's very, very simple.
Yeah, but people are familiar with PayPal, which is great. So that was a really huge positive for them. And I think if you do maybe a larger volume of smaller sales, that it's fine and it kind of washes out in the end. I do maybe a smaller amount. So like some years I have like maybe 50 transactions for the whole year. So, if one of those gets given back to them, it's maybe a little bit more of a pain point. But yeah, you can start with whatever. And then eventually I do use Dubsado for all of that. So if you do invest in a CMS system, that's one thing that's really important is what payment processing they use and what their kind of quotes and invoicing will be like. So I think they all are good, like all the popular ones, Tabe and Honeybook and all the other ones are pretty good. So do you ask for 50% upfront, or how do you break down were you going to talk about that? Oh yeah. So,
okay. I'll let you go back to it then.
Oh, no worries. So real quick before that is a lot of people ask about, how I follow up with leads. And I think that's so, so important. I was in corporate sales before I left and did this full time. So I think following up is really important. And it just leaves money on the table if you don't follow up with leads, because leads I'm sure you use like abandoned cart emails. If people put their products in the cart, they've already shown that they're interested in it and shown that they want more information about it. So then following up with them, I have a workflow where I follow up once and then I put them in a new category that says I've already followed up once, and then I follow up twice. And then if after the second time, if I don't hear back from them for over a week, I send them like a survey kind of asking them why they didn't go with me. And so sometimes they don't fill that out. That's completely fine. But it's important for me to know how many leads I got. So like say out of my last 20 leads, it's important for me to know where they came from so that I can kind of nurture those channels. So if I got out of 20 leads, say I got 10 of them from wedding planners, then I need to, make sure I send those wedding planners samples and updated pricing and things like that throughout the year so that they keep sending me those leads. So I need to know where they came from, and then I need to know how many of them, I was able to provide a quote for, and then from that, how many I had to follow up with, how many ended up kind of dead leads that got the survey, and then how many of them ended up booking. So, for instance, I went through my last 10 and just kind of calculated it, and I ended up with like a 40% book rate. So 4 out of the last 10 booked, which may seem low, may seem high, depending on what industry you're in. My number one reason that people say they don't book me is based on price, and that's okay with me. But also at the same time, I don't want to just keep getting tons and tons of people that aren't booking on price, because I do spend time creating the proposals. So what you want to do is, if price is the reason that people aren't booking you, if style is the reason that people aren't booking you, et cetera, that just means they're not your clients. It's not personal. It's not offensive. It doesn't upset me, but I want to decrease the amount of time I'm spending creating quotes for them, emailing back and forth with them, et cetera. So I want to decrease the number of those leads that are coming in. So, when I go through this and I did these last 10 and was like, okay, I 6 of them didn't book, most of which were on price. Maybe I can do something better to qualify them up front on price. So maybe I can put something on my website that is more obvious, that talks about general price ranges for my products. Maybe I could create a pricing guide and make that downloadable on my website. Maybe I could, in that email where I follow up with more information, I could, mention my average price range and things like that. So no matter what your reason is for not booking them, it's not your fault. It's not a bad thing that people aren't booking you. That just means they're not your clients. But you kind of do want to work on decreasing the number of those people that are coming in so that you're not wasting time and they're not wasting time either. So that's kind of the whole quoting process. And now I'll go to contracts and retainers and all of that. So once we've kind of agreed on a quote with someone, they can go through, because they use Dubsado, they can go through and submit. They click that they accept the proposal. They can sign the contract and pay the deposit all at once. So contracts, once you're ready to do that, you can purchase them at the contract shop. I'm sure Becca's mentioned them before, kind of the leading supplier of contracts in the creative industry. But I do, once you start doing larger jobs, I do recommend having a contract. And then if you are writing it yourself or something, paying a lawyer to look over it is a really great investment that you can make, or purchasing one from somewhere like the contract shop where it has been approved by legal. And they have on there like which parts are editable and which parts are not editable, so you don't make any mistakes. So those are really easy if you don't want to like hire a lawyer to actually look over yours. But I ended up hiring a lawyer, and she added a bunch of clauses that I was like, oh gosh, that was a scary like gap in my contract that I didn't even realize. And luckily, like that hasn't been a huge issue for me, but it does just make you feel so much more confident to have that contract. Like if someone wants to, debate one of your clauses or debate, they ask you to, if they can send in something a week late and still get it on time, you can just kind of say, per the contract, ... And it's just such a good feeling.
I actually had my contract from the contract shop saved my butt once. I had a client who asked me for a quote for like quite a large job, actually, like many, many, many pieces of signage. Agreed to it. I sent her the contract, and she actually read over it, which is great because most people probably wouldn't. And she replied back and asked me about the clause in there that said that she couldn't resell or rent out my work afterwards. And of course you can't resell or rent out my work afterwards. And so she said, I just want to make sure that I could actually sell it to other brides after. And I said, no, absolutely not. You can't. And I said, if you want to, I can give you a price on it. So then I gave her the price for that on top of what her original quote was. So stuff like that. And I think originally I had a contract that I just wrote myself that I thought, covered enough things like how, how they have to pay and when they have to pay and all the, those things. But the stuff like that, like, can you rent it out after and stuff like that? I would have never thought to include that in a contract unless I purchased one written by a lawyer. So that definitely has saved me a couple times.
Yeah, I was adding for the first like 10 jobs I did with my contract. Things came up that I'd be like, oh crap, I have to add that. And then when I had the lawyer sign it, she added some things about, for instance, I work with people out of my state a lot. So she kind of added which state's laws we're going to follow if we do get to moderation or if there's a dispute, which is an important clause that I never would have thought of. Because, for instance, the laws for contracts in North Carolina are different than laws for contracts in California. And so if the client was in California and I was in North Carolina, we have to establish like which laws are going to go into effect when we're moderate, like if we go into moderation or something like that.
And I think that like this conversation is probably scaring people because contracts can be really scary. So I'm going to just reiterate again, if you are worried about this, you should get a contract from the contract shop. They're expensive, but if you're going to be doing client work, it's totally, totally worth it. And I can put a direct link in the comments afterwards as well, but it's for sure worth it. And again, in the panic-free pricing guide that Joanne and I wrote, we talk about contracts and why they're important and when you should use them and what kinds of things should be in them too. So if you want to write your own, that's a good way to figure out what should be in them too. And I actually did one of these live Q&As with Christina Scalera, who founded the contract shop. So if you need to get more legal stuff, just look into all of that. And that's, because it can definitely be a scary conversation.
So to answer your earlier question from like 10 minutes ago, I do require a 50% retainer. So in the contract, I have all of my process things, which includes things like how long between when they send me their information and they get their first proofs, how long between revision proofs, how long between proofs and assembly and shipping, how long shipping is, it also talks about how I want to be contacted. So if you're getting brides that text you, and you don't want that, which I don't, because I need a written document of everything and all changes. I need to be able to find those in my email. That's in my contract. And also things like, one lesson I learned the hard way was that I kept telling this bride it would take 2 weeks to put her invitations together. And that was true, but she ended up being 2 weeks late on her approvals of the proofs. So I went on a 10-day vacation and had to come back and put together 200 invitations in 3 days and calligraphy all of them. So I was like going crazy. And that was all because I had not explained to her that if she delayed the process, it might go longer than 2 weeks. So all those things are things you can put in your contract. But yeah, at that point, after we've done the quote, they can do all of that, and they can go through and pay my 50% retainer. And I like to call it a retainer and not a deposit because it's not refundable. So certain parts of it are not refundable. For me, I have my pricing set up so that I have a design fee, which is a little bit higher and covers all of my calligraphy, watercolor, painting, etc., all of my time for design. And then I have production fees. So if they haven't started production yet, that can still be refunded if they do cancel their contract. But all my design fees are non-refundable after they go ahead and pay. So the 50% retainer always, at least, or for the most part, covers that entire design fee on almost every order. So because that's going to usually be more than, it would be less than 50% of the total cost. So they have to pay that, and if you call it a deposit, a lot of people, and legally it can be seen as refundable if you call it a deposit. So I like to call it a retainer for my design time. And then if they do cancel after that, I can only refund the production costs. So I use Dubsado to do all of that. And then I have it all in one system, which is really nice. Before I was just sending them in like Adobe Reader, and they could sign, kind of like virtually sign the contracts and send it back. Sorry, I'm a little sick. And then from there, we kind of start the design process. So some of the questions we had about proofs and revisions, I get asked a lot how I collect information. And this is something that really evolved when I moved over to Dubsado. I was able to create a questionnaire, which you could easily do in PDF or Word document form as well. So I have both a design questionnaire and an invitation information questionnaire. And the design questionnaire, sometimes we cover in a consult, like if we do have a phone consult, or if they put in their contact form what they want. So I don't always send that, but it's got questions about things that are important to them, where they like to shop, colors for their wedding, things that help me see an overall view of what they like. There's a bunch of adjectives, and they can check like the ones that they want. I can link these in the PDF because anyone can see them.
I think that like yours is probably a little more specific than what people would need to ask for signage and stuff like that. Like if you're doing a full invite suite, like you would want to know really in depth on like their personalities and their styles and stuff like that. But when it comes to signage, it's pretty straightforward. Like I kind of just have a list of bullet questions that I'll ask them. What they do and what they don't like, if they like embellishments, if they like flourishing, if they want block letters, if they want calligraphy, like stuff like that.
Yeah, and actually for day of stuff, I have a separate questionnaire that I send to them that has like a section for escort cards, and it says, I can link this in the downloadable PDF as well, and it says like, do you want tinted or flat? And they suggest, and they select one. And then I say, check all that you want on here. And it's got like first name, last name, titles, like Mr. and Mrs., meal choice, table number. And then it has like my color chart of inks that are available and things like that. And there is a section for signs because I still do 8x10 signs. And so I put on there like, what color background do you want? What color text do you want? And then they choose from the available colors and things like that. So it's just all in one place because I was finding that I was doing a lot of things incorrectly because I had 40 emails like, oh, actually, could we do gold instead? Or, okay, what color ink do you want? What do you suggest? And then 10 emails later, we decide on a certain color, and I, had it in my brain wrong or found a previous email that wasn't updated with the most accurate information. And they can upload their Excel sheet there. For instance, if I were doing a seating chart, because I still design them as files, they can upload that template right there. So it's all in one place.
And this is another thing, again, that like clearly you have perfected over the past 5 years, maybe not even perfected, but like improved in the past 5 years, because like you said, you did start with just email chains. And I think a lot of people still do that. So for people, again, who think that they need to have these questionnaires all made before they can ever have a client, it's just not true. No. It just makes it better in the long run as you continue to improve things. But for now, the email chain is fine.
Yeah.
Just keep track of it.
Yeah. And one thing I did when I was using email chains that might help you is like at the very end, say, and you can start it with a special subject line that you can search later that's got the word final in it or
to
something.
Recap or something. Yeah.
Yeah. And so then you could like type in the person's name and recap, and then that email would come up. So put in there like bullet points, like, okay, escort cards, quantity 100, color cream, ink color blue, like, and put all of that and say, I'm just clarifying, you know, you do need meal choices. You don't need meal choices. Here's what we decided to do for meal choices. Like all those little things, just put them all in one place so that when you're actually starting that project, you have all that information there. So you can do all of these like questionnaires and things that I'm mentioning. You can do them as a Word document on Google Drive and just copy and paste them into an email. There's no reason that has to be like through a fancy system. But what you'll find, like when you're doing this process flow, you'll circle like areas where there's a lot of error. And I'll talk about one in a minute that I have just changed a lot of things because it was where I was making the most errors. And if you find that, you know, you're having to redo stuff because you had the wrong color paper or ink, or you didn't see the updated email, then that can be a way that you can help avoid some of that. So just making like a copy and paste. I talk about automating a lot, but copy and pasting a template from a Word document is the same thing as automating. So don't have to be all fancy about it.
Okay, so we've collected all the information we need. We have everything signed. We have the retainer. Now you actually do the work.
Now I actually get to do the work, which is always fun. This whole first part seems like it's harder than the actual work process, and sometimes it really is. So then we have a week to create proofs. So that can change based on, you know, if you're doing every single thing, like customized watercolor, that might be different. If someone's doing something really involved, I can change that time frame for them. And then
when you say proofs, I mean, I think proofs are a little more specific to invite design too, because you wouldn't really send a proof for like a seating chart or a welcome to our wedding sign. But some people will send a sketch and that kind of stuff. And I talked about that a little bit when I did this live session with Jessie from Calligraphy, who does a lot of signage. She talked about how she doesn't send sketches. And so it's totally a personal decision. It's something that you can experiment with and see if you like sending sketches or not. I know some people swear by sending them because they want to make sure that their clients are happy. And some people swear by not sending them because they don't want to set any precedent that they can't achieve, or they don't want to have any issues where they can't make changes. But I think in the invite design world, it's a little different sending proofs wise. So you send kind of a PDF, or how does that work?
Yeah. So I started out just sending PDFs. The one thing that I found with PDFs that is a little bit tough is that it doesn't always show the pieces in relation to each other, size-wise specifically. So if you are sending PDFs, I think that's totally fine. Just send the piece in the size that it is on like an 8x10 PDF, and then advise them to print it out. So if they print it out and they see it next to like the details card and things like that, it can help them just see things a little bit better and make those decisions. So I always recommend people printing things out. It also helps to catch spelling errors, which is the number one cause of reprints for any stationer, I believe. I had a client who spelled her name wrong the first time. So we reprinted all the invitations, and then she realized that she had spelled her fiance's name wrong too. So we had to reprint again. Same.
Oh my God. I mean, yeah. I can't even imagine like the cost for doing that with invites, because it's enough when it's on signage pieces. Like, and I tell clients like, okay, double check them, but then triple check them, but then quadruple check them, because I'm going to spell exactly what you gave me. Like I'm not going to deviate from it at all. So if you spelled something really ridiculous, I'm going to copy it. Like I'm just going to assume that you did that on purpose.
Yeah. And even if your contract is really tight on this, which it needs to be, that you don't know these people, if you're doing a seating chart, you don't know who's related to whom, you don't know anything about this. And even you also cannot be held responsible, even if it's a word that you should know how to spell. Like if I make a typo or something, if they don't catch it, they still need to be held responsible for that. So even if your contract is really tight on this, they sign the contract typically for invitations at least a couple weeks before they end up signing the proof. So I like to reiterate that particular clause before printings, just so that they know. I've had a client before say, oh, everything's great on the proof, and sign the proof, full contract, everything, and then say in an email like the next day, but I noticed that Tuesday was misspelled. I assume you're going to fix that, but so everything looks great. And I'm like, why would you assume I was going to fix that? So just reiterating that particular clause is really important to just setting the right expectations. So even if your contract technically protects you on something, the number one thing that you're responsible for is setting the right expectation for your clients. So even if it came to court, you would be fine. You still want to have a happy client. You still don't want it to go to court. So any little thing that you could do, especially if you can just kind of copy and paste like a proof approval email into an email body where it reiterates that clause, that's going to help you out in the long run with just better reviews, happier clients, not going to court. So we do, if you are printing stuff, you can decide how many revisions you want to allow. You can decide how you want to handle all of that. And when you send over your proofs, I usually have them sign off, and I have all the different places they need to check as like, is time okay? And then I have production details, like what color envelopes, if there's any like liners or strings wrapped around it or ribbons or anything like that. I have all of those production details listed. And so they have to sign off on all of that, and they have to sign off on all the spelling and everything as well. So then they have proof approval. Yay. And then we go into production, which is its own task. So it kind of seems to me like if you're an artist, if you love designing, if you love creating this stuff, that part of the job is the easiest part. It's the before and after that's kind of the annoying part. So so for me, most of the errors that I make are in the production process, and I'm working on a few new things to implement even now to cut down on some of those errors, because previously I was making errors in other places and focusing on automating all of that. But now my business has changed, and then most number of errors I make are in that process. So by creating this whole flow and writing it all down, I was noticing like, okay, all my mistakes now are no longer in this area because I fixed this area. Now I'm making a bunch of mistakes in this area. So we're actually printing out this, we're doing this production sheet. I can show you what one of them looks like. It's very simple. It was also done on Google Sheets. It's just a little Excel sheet. And I basically just have each piece, and I have like color and quantity, and size, and where we're getting them printed, what paper we're getting printed on. And then you can check off when it's done, and then notes for the order, because each order's got a little something on there. So this just gives mail date and wedding date and all that kind of stuff. So it's just all right there. And then I actually print out their proof as well and write all over it. So I know exactly kind of what everything's supposed to look like. And when I'm going through the production, I have, for instance, with these, we have the white printer printing the return addresses, which I have to send them, and they require 15% extra. And then I need 15% extra after that to do calligraphy. So I went through and wrote down, so I have on there quantity, printer extras, calligraphy extras. And so that way I, have ordered enough so that I have 15% extra for the printer, and then 15% extra for me after they're printed. So that's something that I've done just to kind of get some of those errors down and make it so that we check off like every little thing. So I'm sorry, I'm getting a little... I've been like coughing for days, so I'm glad I've made it this far without coughing. I hope I don't jinx myself. Don't laugh. My assistant's laughing at me. Okay, so and another thing that we do for the clients is to send them a production timeline, and we typically don't send them that until they've approved the proofs, because it's going to change a lot based on when they approve. So for instance, if someone approves something on November 1st, it'd be different than if they approved it the day before Thanksgiving, because we have mailing delays and holidays and things like that in the middle. So if I'm trying to get someone to hurry up, I'll go ahead and send them the timeline and be like, if you approve tomorrow, this is where we're at. And sometimes they are like, oh crap, this is not as fast as I thought it would be, or something like that. I tell them up front how long it's going to take approximately, but then if I kind of give them the timeline again, it just kind of puts them in motion to get back to me if I haven't heard from them in a couple days. But typically I wait till afterwards and send them the timeline. That's good for them because they're not just sitting there for 2 weeks wondering where their invitations are. Gives them an idea of how long it takes to do everything, and when their due dates are. For instance, if they approve the proofs, I don't necessarily need their addresses that day, because I'm not going to have the envelopes to put the addresses on for a few days. So that's got all their like due dates, and recommended dates to order postage and things like that. Then we order everything and then we assemble it. And then during the assembly process, we have that their final invoice is due the week before the invitations are shipped. So this typically we're probably going to change it to having it due upon proof approval, just so that we get the money a little like before we've ordered all the pieces. So as it is, we don't ship them anything until we've received all the money. So sometimes I have clients who haven't paid yet and their stuff is sitting here ready for 3 days, and I just have to tell them everything's ready. It's in the box. I'm just not going to put it in the mail until you pay me my money. So just having that all outlined in your contract is great, but we always make sure to go back and update the invoice. And you can have different policies. There's a lot of different views on this out there, but I do let them change the quantity up or down as long as it doesn't change by more than 25. If they go up, they have to let me know upon proof approval so that I can order more. And I just add those in at the same line item price per piece as before. So if they go down more than 25, I tell them that their line item price might increase. And people don't usually change too much, but it's just like in the process of creating their list. I'm sure you guys know if you do seating charts or anything like that, it goes from 102 to 106 or something like that. And then I ship, and then from there, what's really, really interesting. So Becca had asked me, like, one of the questions you guys have is, what do you do if you have an unhappy client? So what's really interesting is I typically don't hear from people after they get their invitations. Sometimes I do, and it's great.
No news is good news, right?
Yes. And sometimes I am like sitting here for a week thinking they hate their invitations because I know I can see they've been delivered and they just have not said anything to me. And then, I'll reach out and just say, hey, hope you liked everything. Let me know. And I have a thing in the box that tells them to tell me what they think of it. But it's just so interesting how people don't respond to you. And then they end up being like, oh yeah, we loved them. Like, we already sent them out. They're great. But yeah, so if you have an unhappy client, I do actually have an entire YouTube video on my YouTube channel about dealing with client issues. But a lot of it just comes back to setting the right expectations and setting the right tone for the conversation. So if you have an unhappy client, just listen to them, hear what's making them unhappy, and then there's probably going to be an answer to like the question of fault, there's probably going to be an answer based on your contract terms. Most of the time, there's an answer. Whether you fully abide by that answer is up to you. Like if, for instance, they provide the right name, I made the typo when putting it in the design and then they didn't catch it, technically it's their job to catch it. If I made the typo in the first place, sometimes I'll like do a reprint at cost or split it with them, but that's completely up to you on a case-by-case basis. But there's typically going to be an answer to who is correct based on your email chains, your proof approvals and things like that, and your contract terms. So just listen to them. Typically when I talk to them, I try to talk to them on the phone because it's just a little bit easier to hear how they're doing, how they feel about it. They might be mad at you, but let them know that you're going to do some research and figure out how to fix it. If you can fix it immediately, or if you know off the top of your head how you can fix it or what the options are, it's fine to tell them that. But if you don't, which happens in most cases, like I typically will have to see if it was a printer error or if it was my error or if it was on the file or, you know, and then see, I had one client where everything just went wrong and it was really no one's fault. It was just like little, kind of little errors that were happening all over the place for the same client. And it was right around a holiday where there was going to be no mailing. So I had to kind of tell her, here are your options and here's like the time frame for each one, but I'm going to have to go do some research and see what we can do and talk to the printer and talk to, you know, the shipper and talk to all this other stuff. So don't feel weird telling your client that you need to do a little research. You don't have to have the answer right away when you talk to them. You don't have to know the solution and be able to fix it. So you can always say, okay, let me do a little research. I'll call you back within an hour, or I'll email you with the options and things like that. And then if you talk to them on the phone, make sure you follow up with them in an email about what you talked about so that you have the paper trail in case anything happens.
But I love, like, I think what you said about setting the right expectations is the most important part, and just being respectful and like a good business person and a good communicator. Like, I think I mean, I haven't had that many issues with clients, but the ones I always find that it's the ones where you kind of let yourself get a little too informal. And it's because you really enjoy working with that client. I don't know if this happens to you too, but it's whenever I have clients that I like really love and that I get along with really well. And then we end up like, you know, kind of becoming friends or just being a little more informal. And then when something goes wrong, it kind of like hits the fan.
Yeah,
and
it's weird.
Yeah. And so it's kind of like a weird thing to navigate, like being totally professional, even though you're like, you know, you really like working with the person and whatever. And then if something goes wrong, kind of weighing like, okay, this might not necessarily be my fault, but it's me as a business that wants to really make up for it and like, you know, make it go smooth and do whatever I can to make it, to put it back properly how it should be. And I don't know, I think some people are just quick to not want to be at fault for it and kind of just defend themselves as opposed to trying to come up with a good solution and like go out of their way to make it better. And I mean, it goes back to the whole, like, the customer is always right. Like, I think everybody worked in retail at some point or like in a restaurant or whatever. And it's always, the customer is always right, even though they are so not right, you know, but you have to, sometimes you just have to make it work. And owning a small business is, I mean, it can be tricky, but you have to just do what you can to fix it within reason.
Yeah. I think there's kind of a balance that you become more comfortable with, the more experience you have. And unfortunately there's no like quick way to get that comfort level. So I become really confident in my contract terms, and letting clients know what the consequences are going to be if they don't follow that. So if I foresee something like their pieces end up being late because they haven't sent me their escort card list, and it's a week till their wedding, you know, just referring to the contract, explaining your process, and then people will, you know, go out of their way to get you that. They have a ton of stuff going on if they're wedding clients. They have so much going on in their brain that they just probably forgot. And then if something does happen that makes them unhappy, for the most part, people are really reasonable for the most part. Yes, some people are going to get mad. But as long as you have acknowledged what's wrong and show them that you're trying to fix the problem, they are typically really reasonable. So, like, I think as small business owners, it's our instinct to want to just kind of give away the farm and just like do whatever it takes to make them happy. And some clients are just trying to trick you into getting a refund, I found, which is really interesting. So if there is an issue or something, don't immediately, like, it's one thing for Amazon to say, okay, I'll just send you a new pen and refund you the money and give you a credit, whatever. They have the best customer service. You end up like making money off of it if they have an error. But that's not really going to work for you because you may have way fewer clients. You're not Amazon. You're not shipping millions of things every day. So, don't immediately offer a full refund if there's a reprint on, or if there's a misprint on like one card or whatever. So the main thing for me is like, if you're able to fix the problem in the right timeline, I don't actually refund. So if you're able to get them something, like if I could get them a reprint in 2 days, which is often the case, then they don't really need a refund. They got the product they needed in the time frame that they needed. However, if they have to wait a lot longer, if they have to do some assembly because they have to like take one card out and put a new card in, excuse me.
It's cold and flu season.
This is my life.
No, that's okay. We're going to have to wrap up soon. So it's perfect timing. You've almost made it to the end.
Right. Someone asked me a question. So
we did get a question.
Okay.
But I agree with what you're saying, to not just immediately, like, as the second somebody's upset, you just email back and say, oh my God, I'm going to give you a full refund. Please don't hate me. Like, please don't leave me a bad review. You still have to, it's this delicate balance of like sticking up for yourself and knowing when you weren't wrong, and also the client happy. So you kind of get a feel for, and it's pretty easy to tell when someone's trying to pull the wool over your eyes and just like get a refund. So, yeah. But the one question we did get submitted was, what's the best way to research the printers you use?
Oh yeah.
And I know that's a little bit off topic, but everyone's going to want to know that.
I actually wrote that down as something to talk about. So I use a variety of printers. Some of them are like online wholesale printers. Some of them are local. And it just, you're going to find that not one single vendor can do everything you need to do. So you have I have my one guy for letterpress. I have someone else for gold foil. I have someone else for digital printing. And then some stuff we do in-house. So it's just going to take a little bit of experience, but you want to ask them certain things like what they're comfortable with, what they usually print. If they are, for instance, a local printer might do a ton of like business flyers, and they might not be the best fit for your wedding invitations because they're not familiar with that type of job and the type of quality or paper or printing processes that go into printing wedding invitations. So you might find if you use someone who's never done wedding invitations before, yes, they're a printer. Yes, they know color and stuff like that and design and paper, but they may not have all the options and have the quality control and be used to those types of jobs. So talk to them about what they normally do if they've done wedding invitations. I look at what papers they supply, because one of the tricky parts of the process, if you're using different printers, is making sure the papers are the same and the colors show up the same on those papers. So there's certain letterpress papers that match certain digital papers, and vice versa. So just let them know, or ask them what they carry, ask them if they're willing to get custom papers for you and what the turnaround times and the costs for those things are. And one thing I like to do is just put your 10 most common items, like 100 A7s digitally printed, 100 A7 envelopes, return address printed, etc. Put those on a list and ask them for an invoice for that. And then you have that as a reference that you can refer back to when you're quoting pricing for your clients. So you can tell, like, this is going to cost me, 43 cents. And so you know that that's kind of the base level pricing that you need to work from when you're pricing for your clients. And I know Becca's pricing guide has tons of information on markups and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And I'm not supposed to say this, but I hopefully, like, not too many people will watch this video in the meantime, but we're actually working on an update to the pricing guide that's going to have a section on stationery design, which is going to have like pricing for that, which is something new that's added to it. Because previous to that, we only touched on the calligraphy part, but yeah, it's going to be really helpful. So we actually haven't gotten many questions submitted. Okay. I think it's a weird time for people to log in, but I know that you're, we just got one. Do you put paper in between each envelope / place card to protect the ink? If yes, what paper do you use?
Oh, I don't. There are, so really dark envelopes on cotton paper can rub off, like in the mail, and get, weird colors and stuff. So in that case, I typically recommend an envelope liner or a tissue paper backing. But I actually don't. I pack all of my place cards, escort cards, invitations for the most part, just one after the other. I don't know. I try to do a test. I'm sure Rebecca's had tons of resources on this, but I try to do a test if I'm using a new ink, and like I'll do one place card and then wait for it to dry and then rub it a bunch to make sure it doesn't come off. Because sometimes you just never know. Like with certain gouaches, I have this one color of gouache that always smudges, and I don't know why. But
I would also imagine that there would be a clause in your contract about what happens if your envelopes get snowed on. Like, yes. Whose fault is that? Yeah.
Yeah. So anything that kind of happens during the shipping process is not my liability. I insure all of my packages when I send them. It costs more, but you charge that to the client too. I make sure I put in there that I insure for the full value of the package. So if something is ruined, then you have that to fall back on. I typically will not just wash my hands of a client if something like that were to happen. But I ship everything in little clear cellophane bags from clearbags.com. So that is sort of waterproof to a certain extent. And then we have a bunch of, packing paper in the box. So that, but I don't put a piece of paper. If I do tiles, I'll put, or anything that's going to scratch off, like tiles or acrylic, I'll wrap those individually. I like parchment paper because won't stick to anything ever. But other than that, not really.
I feel like there are so many little details that go into having a stationery and invite business that just like you said, it wasn't perfect in the beginning, but you start adding things and refining things, making them better over time. And
one thing I thought about really quick when thinking about this whole conversation is that moving from calligraphy to stationery is something that I talk about in some of my coaching calls, where people really want to do that but have never created an invitation suite before. So they think because they like watercolor and calligraphy and things like that, they want the natural step is to move into creating wedding invitations. And that's not always the case. They're very, very different businesses. So creating something for print is very different than creating something by hand. And so the more that you delve into that new place, the more you're going to have multiple process flows. You're going to have multiple types of forms, contracts. Like I have a contract for calligraphy. I have a contract for print design, and I have a contract that covers if a job has both. So they're very separate businesses, and they can come with their own, like I mentioned, the production part of the invitations is where I had a lot of errors. And that's because I'm not like just producing everything by hand myself. Whereas I have very, very few errors on like escort card and place card and table number orders, because I'm just producing all of those by hand. So when you're, if I talk a lot about streamlining your processes, that being said, I do both of these things, but in order to allow, space in my studio, space in my schedule, supplies and materials and stuff, I had to cut off signage in order to allow for more stationery. So just if you're considering going into it, I recommend like testing it out, getting a stationery design that you've designed, printed, and see how that entire process works before you fully make that decision and see if that's something that you want to do.
For sure. Yeah, that's a really good point.
Mm-hmm.
So we have one last question, and then I think we'll let your voice rest. So someone asked, what is the best way to grab the attention of potential clients in the wedding industry? So at events or through your website, or how have you found clients the most?
Yeah, so I have an hour-long IGTV video it's like a recording of a live I did on this. So if you want to get really, really in-depth, check that out at Design by Laney. But I find most of my leads through wedding planners, because I find that if you have the budget to afford custom stationery, or even to some extent some of my semi-customs, you typically do have a wedding planner. So wedding planners make my life easier, I make their lives easier in some ways. So I find that that's a really cohesive relationship. I also started out planning before I was doing invitations or calligraphy. So I kind of was fortunate in discovering that, because I knew a lot of the planners in the area, they would feel comfortable hiring me for that. So creating sample kits has turned out to be the best way to market with them. And then sitting down, I did 2 rounds of sample kits. One where I did a really good job of like inviting them out for coffee, giving them the sample kit in person, and going over every piece and talking about it. And then I did another one when I moved to North Carolina, where I just like blind sent out stuff and expected to have the same positive effects. And it did not work, because they were like, who the heck is this girl sending me packages? Like, what's going on? And we didn't have a chance to have that like face-to-face interaction. But every time I did have the face-to-face interaction with someone, they would send me a job within the next couple months. So I think just getting your name in front of them. I talk about this in some of my like Instagram, my growing your Instagram videos on my YouTube channel, as well as just like getting your name in their head somehow. So whether that's like a comment and a follow on Instagram, whether you respond to their stories, whether you send them an email introducing yourself, or see them at a show, see them at a networking event, do a style shoot with them, et cetera, et cetera. Just keeping your name like in their head is great, because then when they have a client that works with your style and budget and that kind of thing, they immediately think to contact you because they're already thinking about you. So I find planners are great. Events can be great. The number one thing with events is checking how your lead capture process is going to work. So I haven't done too many events, but I've heard that, that you need to like make sure you follow up with them. So you have to get their email address, or maybe it's an event where all the vendors are provided with that information like via email after, but just make sure that when you go into the event, there's a way for you to be able to capture those people and contact them after the event to book them. So
yeah, because I've only done one wedding event where I had a booth, and I really struggled with that, because you don't like, someone comes in and looks at your stuff and you don't know if they end up contacting you later because you didn't know their name. Like, you really have no idea how to follow up with that. But so it can be tricky, but it's also a really good way, even if you're not capturing your leads, just to meet other wedding industry people and create those relationships at those shows. So sometimes it's not necessarily about the people coming to your booth, but the people in the booth next to you or the one across the street. Yeah. I love the idea of getting closer with wedding planners and other industry people. And so a couple of weeks ago, I did a live with Kate O'Malley, who's a wedding planner. We talked about styled shoots. So styled shoots are a great way. And I've talked a million times about the Rising Tide Society. I don't know if you have that in North Carolina, but the Rising Tide Society is a great way. And I think,
and even just like especially if you do signage and stuff, go to the wedding. Like, tell the client you'll deliver for free on the wedding day, and if it's nearby, and go and meet the planner, meet the venue manager, meet the photographers, and then you can like, especially if you meet the photographers, you can be like, I created these 3 pieces. Make sure you get a photo of all 3 of them. And then, one of those follow-up things that you can do after working with the client is asking for reviews, but also asking for photos of your work that you can use for marketing purposes.
Always. And then tag the photographer, and then you get to know the photographer.
And then that's another tag. And then the clients will see that you tagged them. And then it's a whole cycle.
So there were a couple more questions put in
Okay.
here, but we're kind of over time right now. So
Okay.
I'm going to let you just go in the comments whenever your voice is rested and you
Okay.
can just use your fingers to answer people's questions.
Yeah.
Um,
And I'll type up kind of this the process flow with like bullet points of what we've talked about, and link some of those questionnaires and things so that you guys can see them.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you so much, Laney. I think this was really helpful for people and potentially overwhelming, but they can come back and listen to this at any time.
Okay.
And ask questions.
Can I do like one shameless plug real quick is January, I'm going to be launching, it's called like the first 30 days workbook. And so it's basically like an hour to a day of kind of an assignment and information on various topics. So it's going to be like taxes, website design, process flows, ideal clients, like everything that you need to kind of start your business on the right foot. And even if you've already started, it still could be helpful. But basically, if you're thinking about going full time, it's a great way to like get set up from the start in the right place, so you're not making a lot of these mistakes that I made.
Genius. So do you have somewhere to send people for that yet, or is it just upcoming? Keep your eyes peeled.
Yeah, keep your eyes peeled.
Okay.
Let me know. Okay. Maybe I'll create a link to sign up if you're interested in more information about that.
Sure. Yeah. So I have your website up on the screen here, and I've put your Instagram a couple of times, so I think people know where to find you. But other than Instagram and your website, are there other places that people can check you out? I think you mentioned you had a YouTube channel.
I do. It's just youtube.com/design by Laney, and it's got some helpful videos on like printing production. I just released printing production for digital printing and gold foil or letterpress printing. Information about quitting your job and going full time, vectorizing calligraphy, lots of other topics that we talked about.
Awesome.
So
cool. Well, thank you again so much for coming on here, and
thanks for having me.
We will talk soon.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. I'll answer some of your questions in the comments.
Okay. Talk to you later, Laney.
Thanks.
Bye. Feel better.
Thanks.